Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Teacher's Point of View. Really excited to have Paul on today. I mean, he's quite an inspiration. I mean, we had a little bit of a conversation before we started, and I didn't realise you actually came from sort of Africa when you were 11 years old, Paul, and you've kind of worked up the ranks. You worked really hard to get you to where you are, and obviously the last 4 years you've kind of been a principal and in 3 schools now, isn't it? This is your third one, kind of working with obviously kind of like at the top of the food chain, so to speak, in the profession. So I mean, I'm really pleased that you've come on to kind of like express obviously your journey, like tell us about your journey, but also to show like your understanding of where education is and kind of where it needs to go. But if you can just start off, Paul, by kind of introducing yourself and kind of the journey you've had in teaching, that would be a great start.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Paul Mundy-Castle, currently head teacher at Woodcote High School in Croydon, South London. I didn't come here as an 11-year-old. I came as a 15-year-old, actually.
Oh,
I started speaking English when I was 11 years old. So I grew up in West Africa. I'm Nigerian. My mum and dad are Nigerian, so I grew up in lovely West Africa. We left Nigeria at age 13 to go and live in Zimbabwe. 1986, and it was an absolutely amazing country. Absolutely loved it. I actually was very disappointed coming from Zimbabwe to England because it was such a step down, if I'm honest with you, because Zimbabwe had just got independence. It was, from Rhodesia to becoming Zimbabwe. It was a lovely, fantastic time for Pan-Africanism and, sort of that development, seeing what happened in other countries and how they were sort of rebuilding Zimbabwe. Lovely, lovely country. Then came to England. I'd been to England a few times before on holiday because, my dad was a professor of psychology. So we were, sort of reasonably well off. So I'd been to England before and I definitely didn't want to come and live here. So we ended up coming in 1988 when I was 15 years old. 15 in about 4 months. I still remember vividly coming here and going to secondary school just for a little bit. I did 1 year, I did my GCSEs and then spent 2 years at the same school, Graveney School in Wandsworth, South London. Big up Graveney School, fantastic, fantastic school. Kind of school I've been trying to recreate, actually, where your context never mattered. It was once you came into Graveney School, you were in school and you were going to do everything you were supposed to do. I played basketball at a really high level from when I was a junior. I played for the famed Bricks and Top Cats program. I played for England, played for Great Britain. I played 8 years sort of professionally. But even when I played basketball at school, the head teacher, my heads of years, no one really cared. It was like, you haven't done your homework, you're going to get detention. I was traveling all around the country, playing games all over in Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, come home at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday night and you couldn't be late for school on a Monday. So Graveney School were very good at saying, look, actually, fine, you play basketball and you do well at it, but education is important. So I think for me, in all my schools, I've always tried to stress that you can be whoever you want to be, but you're going to need your qualifications at the end of the day to open doors later on in your life.
Absolutely. I mean, what a remarkable career you've had. I mean, what do you think the biggest challenges were for you when you've kind of progressed in your career and you've kind of gone into headship?
I think not so much a glass ceiling because you sort of know it's there. But I came into teaching from basketball, where basketball, the history doesn't really matter. The team you played for when you were young didn't really matter. How tall you were, how quick you were. The only thing that mattered is the game starts, can you deliver? Can you perform? So it's a very, very different mentality when you play professional sports. And once you've learned that and you understand that, it makes it a lot easier to transfer that back into education. Because yes, I heard lots of soothsayers or naysayers. Oh gosh, you shouldn't do this, and you need to do this. Don't go for head of department, go for head of Oh, you're not ready to be an assistant head teacher. None of it ever switched me off. I actually thought it was quite funny. People who I didn't rate in terms of, I saw senior managers who I thought, bloody hell, I've seen you teach. Jesus Christ, how did you become a senior manager? Those same senior managers telling you, oh, Paul Ward, don't think you're quite ready to do this. So those things always, for me, I always take it back to the basketball court where somebody who can't make a shot is trying to tell you how to shoot the ball. Doesn't work for me. So I think I always ignored those. And I think I empathize with lots of, I would say, Black African teachers in England who might hear that negative feedback and then think, oh gosh, maybe I won't apply for that job. Maybe I won't apply for that promotion. And sadly, somebody else might get the job by default just because you don't compete. So I think that's the biggest barrier in terms of promotion and moving up the ranks, is maybe hearing other people saying, not quite ready. I was an NQT in a school in Lewisham, St. Matthew's. It was called St. Joseph's Academy. It's now St. Matthew's. It was one of the first schools to become an academy, and it needed to be. It was a horrendous school in terms of teaching and learning. I loved it. I did 5 years at St. Joseph's Academy. The kids, it was a predominantly boys-only school, predominantly about maybe 90% black boys. It was in Blackheath, but nobody from Blackheath came to St. Joseph's. All, we had kids from New Cross, from Lewisham, even from Hackney coming across the tunnel. But it was a good grounding place for me. Now, as a history teacher, everybody thinks I teach sports because I played basketball professionally, but I'm a history teacher by profession. It's what I'm really passionate about. And it allowed me to learn how to be a teacher, how to actually get young people who were disconnected from learning to connect. And once they connected with me as an individual, it became really easy. It was literally that easy to teach them. They might not go to somebody else's lesson, but they always came to my Mr. Castle's history lessons. And I did that in a number of ways. I changed the curriculum before we were able to change the curriculum. I literally taught Black peoples in the Americas for 7 months rather than 7 weeks, because I wrote the scheme of work myself. Essentially, I just wanted something the kids could gravitate to. And Lewisham Council actually supported the project where we wrote a new scheme of work, which allowed us to really hold on to those boys and engage them in history. So the topic is irrelevant. The hook is much more important. You're going to teach them something they're going to be keen to learn about. So that was, for me, the best grounding to be a teacher when I was at St. Joseph's Academy. And in my second year of teaching, the head teacher, Peter Stickins, fantastic head teacher, offered me the head of year job. He said, look, these kids clearly like you. You've got their respect and everything else you can learn. The things you already have, I can't teach you. So I was actually going to go to play professionally in Portugal because I'd signed a contract to go and play basketball in Portugal. And he had a meeting with me and he said, you can't leave these kids. These are your kids. And he really tugged at me. And I realized, well, actually, I get on with the kids. I enjoy the job. And he made me head of year. So I realized very early on that, if you've got the talent and you've got the application, you should take on responsibility. And that's what I did very early on in my career.
Yeah, fantastic. What do you think it was about you though? Like, what is it? What talent is it? Do you have that kind of distinguished you from maybe others in that school that maybe found it difficult to engage those kids?
It was a black school, black boys being taught by predominantly white people. And there were some kids who were absolutely amazing, but I think for me, they were kids who came from the council estate. Because when I came to England, we moved from a lovely house in Africa to a council estate, Summer Leighton in Brixton. I was like, what the hell is this? Compared to the life I had in Africa, it was horrendous. But I think those boys in Lewisham came from the same background. So they gravitated and they related to me. So essentially, I think there was a connectivity between me and the young people. Every evening before I went home, I would always stop at somebody's house. If a kid was giving me trouble in school, literally on the way home, I'll stop at their home, ring the bell in their council estate, come in, and the parents were like always welcoming because, here was a black teacher teaching my child who is actually connected to that young person. But it grew my reputation really quickly in the school. Oh gosh, Mr. Castle will come to your house. And I think those things really helped to sort of allow the kids to understand that you cared for them. And I think that's the only advice I would give to anyone teaching young people. You've got to find a way to show them you care for them. Sadly, I don't teach anymore. As a head teacher, I don't think you're paid to teach anymore. And I know some head teachers do it, but I don't think it's fair on the young people because you have a timetable and you might have a meeting and you've got to have a cover teacher in, and essentially they don't get the best of your time. I loved when I was a teacher. And now as a senior manager, I find different ways of showing young people I care for them. It might be something as simple as let's fix the toilets. When I took over Woodcote High School, I mean, honestly, the facilities were third world facilities. The toilets were, I've documented my journey on Twitter and LinkedIn where I constantly update on the things I'm doing. But even fixing the toilets for the young people so they've got decent, clean toilets means they know, somebody cares for me, the head teacher cares for me, the school cares for me. So now when we ask them, we ask them to do more in lessons, you can sort of caveat that with, look what we're doing for you to ensure you've got it might not be a brand new school, £25 million school, but it's a functional school. Our drinking taps were in the toilets. And now I've got an 8-year-old son and I tell him don't drink in the toilets. But yet at Woodcote, the kids literally, you wash your hands here and then there's one tap labeled drinking water, stinking toilets, like literally terrible in terms of the stench. Yet you expect young people to drink from there. I'm like, gosh, this is England. So I sort of spent the money very quickly to update the toilets, put water fountains outside of the toilets, outside in the playgrounds. But I think things like that subconsciously connect the young people to understand that actually the school is taking care of me. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, and obviously they probably feel in some respects they're on this journey with you, right?
Yeah.
And I think, you know what, you've obviously mentioned kind of connecting with children because of your ethnicity. And I think it's obviously in the news recently, there's a lot been about kind of BAME educators within the profession and in particular BAME educators within senior leadership teams. And obviously the big thing about that is, it is that connectivity part of it, isn't it? It's like if students can't relate to somebody, like, I mean, they're not going to really buy into the vision. And it's very important that they feel familiar and comfortable with people that they are maybe associate themselves with. And I mean, like, obviously your views on like the BAME community within the profession, I mean, where do you think it's at the moment?
I never represent BAME. I'm very careful about that. I'm a Black African male. I'm Black, Nigerian, British. I put that on my Twitter handle. So I'm very, very proud to be Nigerian. I'm very, very proud to be British because I've taken a lot out of Britain, but I've given a lot back to Britain. So it's never an unequal relationship where I feel, oh gosh, the burgundy passport has been everything, because I love my green passport. I've actually got 2 passports. So I've given as much as I've taken. And I think that's how you've got to look at the relationship. So I don't speak on behalf of the BAME community. I do speak as a Black African teacher. And I think going to Graveney School, for instance, I never thought about being a senior leader. I never thought about being a head teacher because I didn't see any Black male African descent or Caribbean descent senior leaders. So I think subconsciously you think, well, I'm going to do well in school and then I'm going to move on, but you never think about coming back. So I think it's unfair for white, Asian, maybe young people to have role models in school and then maybe Black Africans not have those same role models. So it's not so much we need to positively discriminate. I think we have to positively be inclusive to ensure if you've got a school where 40% of the kids are Black, African and Caribbean, then you can't have 0% of the senior management not being Black, African or Caribbean, because essentially what the subliminal message you're sending to those young people is, I don't think this is for you. And I think if we don't give them positive role models that they can see, touch, feel, then maybe when they go home to the council estate, because I lived in Somerleyton in Brixton, our role models are the ones we see. And actually I might then become more attracted to somebody who on the surface looks like they're doing well. They've got a nice car, they've got nice jackets, they've got lovely trainers. How they get the money is irrelevant to me. Whereas if I've got different, a smorgasbord of role models, it's a lot easier to say, actually, maybe I don't want to be like this person. I more want to be like Mr. Castle, who's a head of year, or Mr. Castle, who's a head of history, or Mr. Castle, who's an assistant head teacher. So I think we've got to create those role models so young people sort of see who can I hook onto, because when you're young, I think that's very, very important to look at somebody you can sort of hook onto and say, oh, I wouldn't mind being like them.
Absolutely. I mean, because a lot of kids, they don't have those role models at home in particular, do they? Or necessarily do they? So when they go into school, it's for teachers to kind of, in some respects, be that role model and inspire them to want to progress and have an opportunity in life and want that opportunity in life. Because I think obviously the world has changed. I mean, in the nicest way possible, but teachers are no longer just people that pass on information to students. They have to inspire kids to want to learn, because realistically, everyone's got a phone. They can go on Google and just find that information if they want to. But why should they want to? And that's for a teacher to kind of inspire them to want to, right? And the world has changed. I mean, where do you think education is with the current changing world at the moment?
I think you made a really valid point about the power of this tool here, the mobile phone, and what you can actually do with it. I think because we don't have to retain as much knowledge here, you can do your calculations, you can Google something. I do think we've got to shift a little bit to how do we make young people more critically aware. So even when they come across some information, how do they process that information? The US elections were a very, very good example of that, in terms of actually there was a lot of information overload. And, why should I vote democratically for the Democrat? Why vote for the Republican Party? What do they actually stand for? Or am I consuming those little bite-sized, one-sided adverts that tell you, oh, Joe Biden is great, or another one that tells you that Donald Trump is great? So I think the focus has to be, how do we make young people more critically aware so they can process a piece of information and then they know how to counter it, to say, well, okay, I've heard one narrative, where else can I go and get a different one? If all I watch is Fox News, then I might just see the world through Fox's lens. If I watch CNN, then equally I might just see the world through their view. So I think it's a really important journey for us as educators now to think about how we help young people to interrogate the facts that we are giving them. Even with the BBC, if you're a BBC watcher, you're going to see that point of view of the world. And I think, yeah, that's something we've got to really focus on in terms of educators. And I also have always believed in the soft skills that are not always explicit in the curriculum, the hidden curriculum. And I'll give you an example. When I started at Woodcote, pretty similar to when I started at Richmond, if I'm honest with you. At both schools, kids were getting a very quick lunch because, you know, there's lots of kids, a very small canteen. Here's your food in a little paper packet, take it, eat it, scoff it down, throw it away. Very disposable, plastic forks, paper to throw away, plastics to throw away. And I changed that culture within a year by buying china, buying cutlery, changing our lunchtime routine so kids could actually sit down and have a meal. Because essentially when you go into the work industry, we assume, oh, clearly you know how to use a knife and fork properly. Well, you might assume that's going on at home. But if they've moved away from a dining table experience, then maybe people are having their dinners off their laps and that's what they're used to. But school allows you the opportunity to say, no, actually, we've got a 50-minute lunch break. You're going to sit down, you're going to take a tray, you're going to grab your plate, and you're going to have a civilized conversation. We've introduced partner voices in the canteen. So you speak to the person in front of you. The person down there shouldn't be hearing your conversation. These are things we've got to teach young people. You queue with your tray to get your food. There isn't, oh, just let me, jump in and get it. Because when they get out to wider society, these are the skills they're going to be expected to use. At the end of lunch, they carry their trays, they scrape their plates, they stack. They learn to do more for themselves and develop those soft skills that I think are going to be so important to us as an island nation going forward, actually, on the back of what's happened with Brexit, that we have to maybe look to do more from within.
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. And you talk about soft skills, but I think they should be called essential skills now because the world has changed so much. I mean, maybe 50 to 100 years ago, yeah, absolutely, academic was the way forward. But that's naturally because people tended to socialize more and they had more like interpersonal skills and soft skills in some respects because you didn't have a mobile phone. You didn't have like laptops. You weren't like constantly streaming TV shows. Do you know what I mean? The world has changed so much. And like, I mean, I was reading this case study by this FTSE 500 company who basically spoke about when graduates come out of university, how they have to completely retrain them because they've got a lack of confidence, they've got a lack of interpersonal skills, they've got a lack of social skills, and like they're afraid to challenge ideas, they're afraid to be innovative, and like the world has changed so much. Like the knowledge-based curriculums, in my opinion, are very, very dated now. Not in the respect that they need to be taken out completely, because you do need knowledge, you do need to retain information, but ultimately it's the application of knowledge which I think should be looked at. And there was a gentleman in Dubai that I spoke to on my podcast who no longer does centralized exams at the end of every year. What he does is the kids will sit on a computer, they'll get a case study. So then it's for them to go and research what that case study and then come back and apply knowledge to that case study to see, and that's how they do their assessment. I mean, that's far more like actual relatable to the real world, in my opinion. I mean, do you think we kind of need to move from a knowledge-based curriculum, or do you think it still has a part to play, but we need to add something to it?
Yeah, I think this is not something that thankfully we should ever decide in a hurry in terms of knowledge and skill-based curriculum. I think they both have equal merit. I give you an example because working with secondary school children, because of what I learned in school, I assume quite a lot that, kids must know where Newcastle is in relation to London. And actually, for some young people, you give them a blank map of Britain and you say, where is Leicester? Where is Newcastle? Where is London? And if we don't spend the time lower down as they come through school to ensure they've embedded some key big knowledge issues, I think we are in danger of having a generation that skips that bit. And then when somebody gives them a map of Britain and says, well, actually, Newcastle is right next to London, they might not be able to challenge that because this is what they know, rather than actually what are the key knowledge strands that we want every young person at age 13 to have acquired. Which prime ministers do we want them to know about? What do we want them to know? What 5 things do we want them to know about the tutors, the stewards, And I think we just have to agree that, yes, a knowledge-based curriculum right now is far too content heavy. How do we strip it out to ensure we are giving them the right knowledge that they can then use and then apply the skills that we will give them in terms of critical thinking, teamwork, being able to sort of carry out independent research, be able to make a presentation, all the essential skills that they would then need to elevate themselves and be able to sustain themselves in a working life.
Yeah, of course. I mean, but that's not in the curriculum at the moment, is it? I mean, it's very much centralized exams. That is what the focus is. It's at the end of every year. But some kids are naturally not good at exams. I mean, some kids they might retain the information, but when it comes to putting it down on a paper or in a pressure situation on that one day, they might have had a bad day or whatever. But you're talking about kind of like you're putting barriers in front of them for opportunities in the future in some respects. And we were talking about Montessori schools a little bit earlier, but Gavin McCormack, he says obviously the way that for some kids, like he knows that they might not be necessarily good at exams, but he knows that they're very good at speaking and presenting. So he tests them in that way. And I think obviously here, the education system is very much like it's great for some kids. Some kids will always do well on a knowledge-based curriculum, but for a lot of children, they are going to leave school thinking that they just weren't good enough, and that's a problem.
Yeah, and that's a big problem. And I think schools that are in touch with the young people, in tune with the young people, will always find different ways of assessing young people. I think the end of term test is not the only way we assess young people. And I think lots of schools in terms of assessment for learning have really done some good work in terms of how do we carry on continuous assessment. So everything even if a child does poorly in the end of term unit test, you then look at their class contribution, you look at their classwork, you might look at their homework, you might look at the kind of questions they ask in lessons, which really show you the depth of their own understanding. So I think lots of schools have become hopefully quite fine-tuned in terms of different ways of looking at how young people can show what they're able to relate in terms of what they've learned from past learning. So it's not just down to the end of unit test, but I do take the argument that exams are heavily dependent on the exam boards because they sort of set the exams, they tell you what the text is going to be. And we would be doing young people a disservice if we said, well, actually, I've got to teach you about the Second World War, but I'll spend all the time teaching you about what Adolf Hitler did in Nazi Germany and not everything else. Because when they go into that content-heavy exam, their knowledge will not be there. So it's a balancing act to say, well, okay, what do you need to know to help you to be able to pass your exams? But there will also be questions in that exam that will force you to analyze, to compare, to contrast, and give your own point of view on an issue. And I think that's a skill we've got to keep developing in young people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just kind of picking up on what you said about kind of assessing the children throughout based on their classroom performance and the contributions. But obviously, just from my understanding, apologies if I'm being naive here, but from my understanding, the children the final grade will come from that exam though, won't it?
Yes, because obviously we've sadly done away with a big percentage of exams that have the coursework element because there was all that argument about how much is it the teachers are controlling, how much is it the child's own work. Mm-hmm. And I think that is sad because actually controlled assessment or coursework was a really good way of giving a child a fighting chance where you're going to the exam knowing I've already got 40% of the assessment done so that it's not do or die with the exam. And I think there's a lot of pressure on young people to do really well in an end of year exam that might be 100% of the grade. And I think that puts them under undue pressure. And I think we as the adults in the society, we've got to find a better way of balancing that really. I do try and discourage young people. If we find a young person is better situated to a vocational qualification, I think it is important the community, the teacher, the family, and that child meet together to agree, well, actually, this might be a better course for you, because I do know lots of young people, even if they don't want to go, being driven to the university side, and I'm not a fan of that. I think university is not for everybody, unless you're very clear about what you want to do at university. I mean, when I first went to university, I had no clue. I signed up, went in like everybody else. It was only in my second year I then changed my course to do history because I thought about it. I was doing law law and politics in the first year. Well, actually, what really interested me was history. And in the second year, I was allowed to change. So I then changed and did a full history qualification. So I do think it's important to give young people options so they don't see university as the end all and be all. And if you go to university, find something you're passionate about. Because if you're going to study for 3, 4, 5 years, you want to be passionate about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is this big perception that the only way to be successful is through going to university and getting a degree. But the world has changed, and in the nicest way possible. And I've said this a few times, but degrees are just as common as divorce nowadays. You know, I mean, there's so many people with degrees, and they don't end up with any jobs out of it. You know, I mean, I've had friends that worked in Tesco, and they, got degrees, and have now been working at Tesco for the last 8, 9 years. So it's not necessarily open doors, you know, and you're right. I think if you know what you want to do, if you want to become a lawyer, if you want to become a teacher, if you want to become like a doctor, like you need the qualifications to obviously pursue your career. And absolutely, you need to follow the academic route. But when you're talking about, there's so many industries in the world now. I mean, when I only found out about recruitment when I was 24, you know, I mean, there's so much out there. There's marketing, there's PR, there's like Google, there's creativity, and even things like maybe what we should be bringing in is like a lot of boys love gaming. I mean, in computer science or in a technical subject, they should be coming in, bringing an Xbox and rebuilding it or something, you know, like just to make it more practical and relatable to these kids. And I think sometimes especially from what I'm hearing, the knowledge-based curriculum, obviously your hands are a little bit tied in how flexible you can be in what you teach them, because it is those exams at the end of the year that you've got to prepare these kids for. But I mean, how relatable can you make it to these children when obviously you have those restrictions?
Well, I mean, if you think about a subject like history, there is incredible flexibility on the curriculum in terms of you can choose which units you want to focus on, because the exam is quite a big exam. And what you train the kids to is actually, these are the topics we've studied. So even if you've got 20 topics, we're only going to test you on these 3 or 4. So it means actually as a classroom teacher, you can look at your intake, you can look at the kids in front of you and think, well, actually, I think civil rights might be a more interesting unit for this cohort of kids. In 2 years' time, you might decide, well, actually, maybe we want to focus on something else. And I think, so there is some flexibility in my subject, which is history. And so I think that allows you to a certain amount of freedom, to be clear. But yeah, you're right. We have to do well in exams, because I'm not a big fan of league tables, but the performance tables, most parents are very clear. What's the Ofsted judgment on the school, and where is the performance measure on that school? And essentially, if you're a head teacher, you've got to be always keeping an eye on that table. Where are we on that table? If I picked up a school that was 4th in the local authority, then I need to maintain 4th or improve on 4th. I can't drop to 6 or 7, because for the families, oh gosh, yeah, your toilets might be nice, but your performance is dropping. So I'm going to walk past this school and I'm going to go to that school over there. So that's, again, a pressure that probably wasn't there 20, 30 years ago, because families went to their local schools. And I think London is very well connected. You get families traveling, leaving good schools to travel 7, 8 miles to go to what they consider an outstanding school, even if they've never spent a day in the school, never visited the school, just because it's rated outstanding and their progress measure might be 0.02 better than the one that's local. So I think we've got to, for me, look at the benefits of keeping young people local to their local community and using their local schools. That way we pull up all the schools, rather than actually those sing schools that are created in every borough, and every borough's got those sing schools that no parent wants to go to, but they are funded by the taxpayer. We just got a duty to make sure all schools are at least good for young people to attend.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, those schools where parents don't necessarily want to send their children, I mean, they still have an intake of children because other schools are oversubscribed or whatever, and they can't fit every child in. And obviously, the population is constantly growing here in the UK. So, I mean, but you're right. I mean, I don't agree with leaderboards either. I think when you have a school down the road that is outstanding, and then down the road to that school is a school that's in special measures or requires improvement, what you're trying to say is that these children, just because of their location, don't deserve the same quality of education as somebody that lives down the road. I mean, I think it's absolutely ridiculous in the nicest way possible. And I mean, I don't mind if it's politically incorrect, because I genuinely feel quite passionate about it. When you look at a model like Finland, if you look at, like, say, Helsinki or a different area in Finland, every single school in that area is on par with each other, because what they believe in is every single child should deserve a good education. So if something's not working in one school, they have teachers from the different schools in the area that will come in and kind of implement the strategies to help move the school forward, or they'll transfer the teachers in between the schools just to make sure that they're kind of giving the right support, you know, and they feel confident that any child that goes to any school, they're going to get a good education. Here in the UK, we don't have that system, and that is because of leaderboards. I mean, when you rank a school near the bottom, you're making it impossible for them to attract the right quality teachers, to obviously get their students to want to go there, and get the parents to buy into the vision. You know, like, it's about taking these kids on a journey and inspiring them, but you're on a constant battle, just trying to get by in some respects, you know.
Well, there are some quick wins, I think, that the government could implement. And I'm always been political. I think we are trained by the government. We are paid by the government. We are state employees. I work in London. I have no problem working in school A or school B. So I think in the first 5 years of your career, for instance, the government could have a little bit more say in terms of where you go to. Because if there is a school down the road with really poor results and a school that's not doing so well, then the one way to ensure they do better is by getting them permanent teachers. But if you go to those schools, they will be the ones with the long line of supply teachers. Well, that's not going to help that school improve. Whereas a more stable school could probably absorb a few cover teachers and still deliver a good product. So I think if you're a state-funded school, there should be an absolute determination to get that school to a good. If you're going to an independent school, it means you bypass the state system. You've got the money to go out, and I think that's fine. But I think everybody who is a taxpayer should want every local school to be at least good. I know there was conversations a while ago about removing the outstanding measure. I was all in favor of that, because I think what we want to aspire to is every school being at least good. And outstanding then is determined by the students to say whether their schools are outstanding or not. What is really sad as well, when I've taken young people casual admission through the years, whenever we've had a vacancy, is when you take a child from a school and they tell you, I've been on the waiting list for 3 years. So for 3 years, I've been in one school wanting to come to this school. And you're thinking, what would those 3 years have looked like if you're constantly waiting for another school to say, oh, we've got an opening, and off you go. Your commitment to that school that you were in for 3 years, your passion, your relationships, everything is skewed, because you're thinking any minute now, you know, and a school down the road is going to have an opening and I'm going to leave. So I think we really have to move away from that mindset. And I would be all in favor of removing the outstanding judgment and saying, actually, go to your local school, go to the open evening, go on a career walk when the school is open and see the school in operation, ask questions and ensure that your own ethos marries with that school that you're sending your child to.
Absolutely. And look, I have quite a lot of respect for you for saying that, because I understand as a head teacher, your absolute number one priority, not just as a head teacher, but as a teacher, like your absolute number one priority is you and your school and your kids, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But ultimately, from somebody that's from the outside, like I want to see every child have access to a good education, you know, and like if there's a school down the road from you that those children aren't like receiving a good education just because they don't go to your school, it's heartbreaking in some respects that those children don't have the same access to the level of education that you are able to offer, you know, and I think as a whole we need to collaborate and actually move education forward to make sure that we are giving everyone a good education. I don't think Ofsted ratings are acceptable anymore in some respects. I think you said it about removing outstanding, but I think all of them should just be good, you know, like every single one should be rated good, and we need to look at that. And we need but just out of curiosity, like you've been there, you've been at St Matthew's Academy, you've kind of worked in different schools, especially in deprived areas. I mean, what do you think the biggest flaw is in schools that are actually like not doing so well? Where do you think that they're going wrong?
Oh gosh, lots and lots. When a school gets it wrong, it doesn't happen overnight. So I think sometimes when you try to fix the problem really quickly, it's never the right fix. It's the one thing I've unpicked with some of the difficult schools I've worked in. The other thing is I don't think a shiny new penny solves a problem. I think we've got a very good way of saying, oh, that school is failed, so let's rebrand it, put a brand new building in there, and they will solve the problem. And in 7 years' time, those issues will still be there, because if you've not dealt with the underlying issue, it might be society related, it might be family related, it might be the locality related. And I think until you get into the real crux of why is this school not performing well, you would only ever be able to put a plaster over it. But there are some key themes that run through schools that don't do well. I think leadership is important. You have to have very, very good leadership. And you tend to see a flux in leadership where head teachers or senior managers come and go. Very, very movable teachers, where teachers come and go relatively quickly. And so you don't then build that relationship, that sense of ownership. And also you probably find young people who don't have a sense of pride and belonging in that school. I've always been very big in all my schools, branding the school. I mean, all my when I was at Richmond, it was "We Are Richmond." Now at Woodcote is "We Are Woodcote." Everything we do, if you go around the school, "We are Woodcote, we are Woodcote." Getting the children, again, it's a team ethos coming from a basketball background where you're going to do this collectively. Not one person is going to help you win the game. And so you try to bind the kids from year 7 that this is your school. Take pride in your school. Use the dustbins. You know, don't vandalize the building. These toilets are yours. Keep it clean. You know. And I think the more you do that, the more you bind the kids. And I think sometimes in schools that don't do so well, you might not have that same sense of this is our team. And I think once you've got that, it's a lot easier to start moving the school forward.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that Phil Sharrock, he's an ex-head teacher also, he basically, one of the things that he finds is a big problem is that head teachers aren't trained enough from when they take that step up into headship to lead a school. I know we kind of briefly touched on it like prior to that we started recording, but I mean, how much of an issue is that within like schools?
Yeah, huge issue. Just because you're a good teacher doesn't make you a good head teacher. Because once you become a head teacher, you become a bit of you're a CEO of a big business. You're dealing, in my case, 125 members of staff. You're dealing with finance. You're dealing with the catering. You're dealing with the cleaning contractors. You're dealing with the PFI from the ESFA. You're dealing with all the rules that you've got to comply with, the financial regulations. You're dealing with 1,200 young people. You're dealing with 2,500 parents. You know, you're dealing with the local authority. You're dealing with Ofsted. So I think the MPQH, which is a very, very good preparation to be a head teacher, touches on a few of those things. But until you are in the job and you get hands-on experience, it is very, very difficult to make that transition from being a teacher who just cares about your subject and your young people in front of you to a head teacher who has to look after everybody and having to apply the rules in an empathic way that actually deals with everybody you come across, so that everybody feels, well, I was heard, I was listened to, but this is the policy, now we're going to apply it. And I think that's a big, big transition for lots of people. How do you just sort of put on that business hat and start to run the school in a more economical way? I've found that difficult in lots of schools I've been in, because sometimes, as knowledgeable as the governors are, they're knowledgeable in their own areas. So they can bring a little bit of expertise in. Somebody might be able to say, well, I can bring a bit of employment law into education. Somebody else, I can bring a bit of financial clout, or I can bring a little bit of educational know-how. But in terms of how much that actually impacts on the day-to-day running of a school, sometimes that is missing. So you make abstract decisions about young people, but it's only the head teacher who's actually able to see all the decisions from all the different perspectives. And I think, yeah, and that takes a lot of time, a lot of toll. And I think that's why the head teacher job is so pressurized, because you're always juggling balls and you've got to make sure you are sort of ticking every box. And sometimes that can be really, really difficult. I've found in the schools I've led anyway.
Of course. I mean, what do you think we could do to prepare head teachers more for when they do make that transition?
Yes, I in terms of the schools I've led, I like very much the federated academized approach to governance. I thought AET did a really good job of having professional governors, so that actually it was a group of governors that sort of looked after a number of schools. So essentially, every conversation was sort of entrenched in very, very clear, precise processes, and you sort of knew where you stood with the governors. I think sometimes if you're a new head teacher and you work with a traditional model of governance, then in a way the governors actually run the school, but they can't run the school from outside. I mean, you've got some governors who never visit schools, or see the schools in operation, but yet they're making the policy decisions. They're setting the agenda. They're setting the strategic direction of the school. So I think we've got to revisit that and look at how do we better. I mean, I think the local authorities, when they had control of schools, at least you had all of that backup with the local authorities. Now you've got so many standalone academies. And I think we are building up a problem in the future in terms of how these schools will become more viable and better run by having so many people who are not educators sort of making the big judgment calls.
Yeah, I mean, it all starts from the Secretary for Education. Do you know what I mean? I mean, if the Secretary for Education is not somebody that's got experience in education, then ultimately everyone can do it, right? So, I mean, it's a shame, isn't it? You're absolutely right. I think it needs to be run by educators. You know the kids better than anybody else. You know the school better than anybody else. And in some respects, it's kind of why, going just back to knowledge-based curriculum, it's why I believe that there needs to be more flexibility given and a smaller booklet of what it needs to be taught, but give you the flexibility to teach it because you know the kids best.
Well, I'll give you an example of one of the difficulties that we face every day. You've got the financial regulation. So in your school, you might have a policy that says, oh, any work that's over £5,000, you need to get 3 quotes. Fine, value for money, taxpayers' money. If it's refurbishing a classroom, you get 3 quotes. That means 2 companies will not be successful. One is going to be successful. So you use that company, Bob's your uncle, you get the classroom refurbished. Then you need to do another classroom and you've got to go and get 3 quotes again. Well, the second or third time you call them, they'll be like, well, sorry, we're not bothered because we've quoted a few times in your school and we've never got the job. So in essence, you're causing a problem where the rules say go and get 3 quotes. But the reality is, if the job is under a certain amount of money and a company is tried to get the job a few times, they will stop sending anybody out to quote. So you solve that problem as a head teacher. And I think they're the little intricacies that government doesn't understand, governors don't understand, but head teachers have to manage. So decisions been made over here to fix the toilet, refurbish the classroom, buy some interactive whiteboards, but the operation of that becomes really complicated. Whereas the academies, the multi-academy trust, because of the economy of scale, they've got their contractors. Yep, you can use that one. This is going to be done centrally. It's flighted down. It's done. It's over. Whereas a standalone head teacher could spend 2-3 months trying to find a way to enact a decision that was taken, 3 months beforehand. And I think they're the real issues of why maybe young people then don't get the immediate benefit of a very good decision that might have been made in goodwill to say we're going to fix something or we're going to upgrade a certain area of the school. The reality is the rules are kind of restrictive, and I think that's where we need more freedom in terms of where business would have that freedom. Yeah. If you're running a local business, you would be at liberty to actually operate like a business, and actually value for money is important, but they find actually who's going to be able to get this done, get it down to the quality we need it done at. So yeah, I think sometimes in schools we have those issues to make sure we're being compliant with all the regulations we sort of have to function under.
Of course. I mean, obviously you touched on multi-academy trust having more economies of scale. Is that the kind of way to go then? Is that the forward? Is that the future of where education needs to go?
My view is we should have a range, a variety of schools. I think when you sort of bring all schools together, like in Croydon, I work in Croydon, and if you look at the choice that's available to families, that choice window is closing all the time. I think there was a time where you could go to a religious school, you could go to a girls-only school, a boys-only school, a multi-academy trust school. There was different ranges for the families to be able to say, what kind of school do I want to send my young person to? And I think sometimes with a big multi-academy trust, because they have a model that works, they sort of spread that model out, and every school looks exactly the same in terms of the uniform might be slightly different, but the policies are the same. The practices in the school are the same. So essentially, you've got the same thing replicated 30 times across 30 different schools. So I think we have to have some flexibility within education, because I think families demand that. And I think we don't all want to shop in Tesco's. I think essentially what you've got on the high street is you've got a range of supermarkets, and they can compete with each other. which is healthy for us as a consumer. So I think it's the same with education. If we go down the multi-academy trust route and everything becomes part of a MAT, then I think you lose that that freedom of choice that sometimes is also quite valuable in terms of what's the ethos of this local school, what does it actually stand for, and then how do local families get behind that.
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's but again, you sort of talk about competition, but it shouldn't be a competition between schools, right? They should be collaborating and they should be moving schools forward. I mean, yeah, there should be a variety of choices. You're absolutely right. Like, not everybody's personality will fit to a regimented system. Sometimes they need more, like, it needs to be encouraged in terms of creativity and innovation, or like some people are just naturally good at art. Some people are more good at maths and just like one organization and structure. I mean, every child is different, right? But ultimately the idea is that like every school should have a good quality education, you know. And
I think that there's a lot of collaboration that goes on in schools that's not publicized as much. I mean, I'm thinking of both schools I've led in Richmond and Woodcote. Actually, the number of ways you collaborate with schools, there's so much that goes on, and I think sometimes it doesn't get the exposure. So the public perception is schools are quite standalone, but the reality is we work hand in hand on so many issues. Even in terms of curriculum planning, we have cross curriculum workshops. We have hard to place panel meetings where you might have a child who's been excluded from one school needs to be in another one. The special educational need teams work collaboratively. So there's lots of ways that schools do collaborate, but you're right, with the league tables and performance, what everybody sees is which school is top and which one is at the bottom, rather than actually all the other webs that weave and control and manage to bind schools together. But that is very evident in every local authority I've worked in. There's been a real collaboration within schools in that local authority.
Yeah, I mean, like, as a head teacher, then you're obviously running a school, and it's been quite a difficult year. I mean, ultimately, what do you think the biggest frustrations for you are? I mean, do you feel like you have the freedom to be able to run the school exactly the way you want?
No, and I don't think anybody should, because it's not your own business. I think we are funded by the taxpayer, but I do think we should be, as a head teacher, everything should be geared to making sure the kids have a fantastic 5 or 7 years experience in your school. And I think I've had difficult times in all I've worked in when I've seen things that I've thought, well, I wouldn't want that for my child. And then trying to change that has been quite difficult because people get used to the way they work. I've had to do some drastic things because, for instance, the toilets, and I will talk about those again. You know, for me, I would not use those toilets. So I didn't understand how young people for year on year were so told that's the toilet you need to use, even though as an adult I had to hold my breath to actually go into those toilets, but yet it was acceptable. And I think that's where we've got to make sure we refocus education. That actually, even if a child doesn't get great GCSEs, what we do want them to leave school is a good experience of school. I enjoyed being in school. I was happy. I made friends. I learned how to work. Now, I might not have got my GCSEs at 16, but I might get them at 20. I might get them at 25. In England, we believe in lifelong learning. So essentially, I think having a good feeling when you look back at your school experience is so important, because I failed maths at GCSE. I remember, and I wasn't bothered because I did well in everything else. I mean, I had 8 or 9 O-levels in GCSEs when I left school. But to be a teacher, when I realized I wanted to go back to university to do my PGCE, I had to go back to college. I went to Lambeth College. I went to the evening class and I got my maths GCSE, you know. So I think my feeling about school was a positive one. So going to college, you know, at 25 to go and get my maths GCSE, I didn't feel negative because my experience had been a positive one. So I think that's the job we've got to do. And I think if you fix things like their toilets, their classrooms, their eating facilities, they will have a positive experience of school. And I think that stays with you for a lifetime. That way, whenever you want to go back to school, you think, well, actually, it was a pretty okay time for me at school. And I think we've got to make sure everything we do is not about us. It's not about who's the head teacher, who's the chair of governors, you know, who's got the local clout. It's about, are we doing things here that actually make those young people's lives a lot easier? At Woodcote, when I got to Woodcote, I spent quite a lot of money changing the exercise books. because the exercise books we had were awful. We personalized the books. We put our logo on it. We put the plastic covers on it. So when the kids pulled out a book, there was a sense of pride. We put in our fuse boxes every 20 pages so the kids could self-evaluate themselves, give themselves an effort grade for the last couple of weeks. But all we did by changing those books was we made them actually something they could be proud of, rather than, oh, it's just another exercise book. Oh, miss, I've lost my exercise book. Can I get another one? You can use all of those minor hooks to get the kids to feel a real sense of belonging to a school. And as long as they've got that, I think half our job is done.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the absolute number one priority, is to make sure that these kids have a good experience through school and you prepare them for life post-school. And look, obviously we've touched on it, but I don't think necessarily the way that education is run in terms of, I mean, I know there's amazing people like you in the profession that are doing their very best for your kids, and absolutely can't take that away from you. I mean, what I'm trying to get at.
It's very tiring to be like me, if I'm honest with you. I think I'm constantly battling, and I get to the point where it's like, what's it worth? I'm doing some work now with the Nigerian government, because there's such a big job to be done over there in terms of how do we produce a mass education system when lots of people opt out to go and work, because working means you bring in income means you can live. So for some young people, education, they don't stay in it long term. And the attraction to go and help do that is becoming more and more stronger, because in England, you constantly are battling, whether you're battling the multi-academy trust, or you're battling the governors, or you're battling the teaching unions, or there's always, or Ofsted, or there's, or now it's COVID and how we prepare schools for COVID. There's always a constant battle that takes you away from the core business of how do we make sure we're giving these young people a really positive experience. So it is getting very difficult, and because I come from a different background, which is sports. I think it's a lot easier to say, well, actually, if it's a constant battle you've got to live under, at some point you will walk away from it and say, well, actually, maybe my type of vision doesn't quite sit well within the English education system, which would be sad, because I think we should have, again, a range of types of head teachers. So everybody isn't, well, this is the only way it can be done. And if it's not done this way, it's not very good. And hopefully my track record speaks for itself in terms of what I've been able to do in the schools I've supported and led.
And that's why I believe that educators should, and schools should have autonomy in the way that they operate. I mean, it shouldn't come from the government, who don't know, who've never been in a classroom. It should be from the head teachers that know their school better than anybody else. And ultimately, it's this trust, like put this trust in these people that have gone and got these like teaching qualifications, and to come out and they've worked up the ranks and they know what they're doing. It's putting that trust in them. But obviously there is the flip argument of those head teachers that find it difficult to transition to headship after kind of not doing it. So, I mean, how do we win? How do we overcome this to make sure that we give enough autonomy to schools? We don't chuck leaderboards and put pressure on them, but to still make sure that we are supporting the head teachers in the right way to make sure that they can deliver good quality education to their children.
Yeah, I think it's not just down to head teachers. And I think head teacher is only part of a team, of a leadership team. And so I think schools have to find a different way of identifying true leaders within their own schools, because there might be somebody who's just a fantastic classroom practitioner. And how do you pull that person to make them think they can contribute at the senior leadership level? Because I think that's where the journey blocks a lot of people, where actually you're very good at this, but how does that transfer over to the other side of senior leadership? And I think I've been very good at that, spotting talent, looking at people who I think, wow, look at their vision, look at their passion, look at their love for the young people. I mentored a head of year, Donna Freer, when I started at Woodcote High School, and she's going to be an outstanding ed teacher because she gets it. It's about young people, and she will do whatever it takes to get them over that hump. If it means coming in every Saturday to work with them, if it means staying late to work with them. And I think the job of a good head teacher is to find those people with the passion. So when those people become head teachers, they never lose the connectivity to young people. That even though I'm not teaching every day, I'm still making decisions that I think will benefit those young people. So I think, schools have to identify potential and pull that talent pool up to senior leadership, even if they don't want to be senior leaders, because some people might think, oh gosh, it's not for me, I don't want to lose the classroom connection. But I think it is important we get more people of that ilk into leadership positions.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to an assistant head teacher last week, and she kind of went from key stage 4 coordinator to assistant head teacher in a sort of a very short amount of time. And she misses teaching. She misses like being in a classroom and being with those kids. And ultimately, that's what you get into teaching for, is making the difference to those kids on a day-to-day basis and inspiring them. So especially the passionate teachers, the ones that get into teaching for the right reason. So it is that much more difficult to kind of step away from the classroom, isn't it?
But they don't ever away full time. Even deputy head teachers have to teach a proportion of lessons. So they might not teach as many lessons as they were teaching before, but assistant head teachers and deputy heads and some head teachers will also still have a timetable. So they will still have a connection to those young people. They never just cut the umbilical cord and, they're not teaching anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like from where you're sitting, and to like stop you from leaving education in the UK and going to Nigeria on this project, I mean, what would need to change in the education system to make it more appealing for senior leaders and teachers to remain in the profession?
Yeah, I think I've done 20 years now in education, which is a long time, in terms of giving back to the education system, and I've really, really enjoyed it. And it's not, I don't want to do it anymore, but I do think in terms of what could keep people like me in education, I think some of the red tape really has to be looked at. I mean, just thinking practically about COVID, and the government makes an announcement about, oh gosh, we're going to test kids, and then we find out about, oh, how are these tests going to happen? And next minute you're reading somewhere on the BBC that military personnel will provide you support. And no, it's not going to be physical support, it's going to be support remotely, and you're like, well, I'm not a trained physician. I don't want to put a foreign object into any young person. And then if I'm going to watch them, supervise them, do the swab, how do I know they've done it properly so that it can be really effective? These are some of the pressures that actually, wouldn't it be better to let's shut down schools, let's turn schools into testing centers, get some people in there, and within 2 or 3 days, you could probably test every single child and have a professional do it. But I think whenever there's something new, emotional well-being for learning, SEND provision, looking at safeguarding, mental health of young people, the physical health of young people, it all cascades down to schools. So all of a sudden we're not just teaching kids, we're also looking, oh, that child was missed 2 days of school, what's happened there? Oh, that child has got a little bump on their, so all of a sudden the job has changed focus. And I think we've got to probably look at, how do we wrap around a little bit more support for schools? Have a school nurse, train more nurses so that every school would have maybe a nurse who visits 2 days a week and they're able to talk to young people, rather than actually it all comes back to teachers and ultimately comes back to head teachers to have a solution, to have an answer in terms of when there is an issue. So I think we've got to look at how we protect teaching a little bit more so that we're not having to do everything all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, you have been on the front line this year. I mean, you've been risking your lives kind of being in school in the nicest way possible. I mean, you have. I mean, like we talk about kind of like the World War and stuff. I mean, you are literally going into battle every day in some respects. I mean, yes, the enemy is not visible, but in some respects, it's still an enemy, and it can still kill you. I mean, there's vulnerable teachers that have a moral obligation to these kids. They go in, day out, but they know that they could potentially get something. And obviously, like it could potentially like wipe them out, and the level of respect sometimes that the profession gets from like politicians and journalists is quite remarkable, in my opinion. I mean, like the people above, like politicians, they should be supporting schools far more than actually just turning it into a political football,
Yes, I think sadly we've fallen into that gap where everybody sort of knows, and we sort of get the information last. I thought the idea of laptops for schools was a really well thought out one in terms of making sure less fortunate youngsters had access to IT at home. But it never materialized. I mean, we had one quota of how many computers we were going to get. That changed, and in the end, we ended up with 14 laptops. 14 laptops when we identified over 600 young people who potentially might have needed a laptop or a tablet. So yeah, it is important that we are working with government collaboratively and we understand what the message is going to be, because the minute that message went out that laptops were going to be available, I was getting emails and phone calls every day from families saying, when can I pick up my laptop?
Yeah.
You know, where's that disconnect with, there's a policy announcement and then there's a reality of, well, sorry, we don't actually have any and we're waiting. And even when we do have them, we've only got 14. So there is no way we're going to be able to furnish everybody who needs one. So yeah, I think there's got to be better stitched up working between government and education, because we're on the same team. And you're right, lots of teachers have actually risked, and vulnerable teachers, you know, you try and tell a vulnerable teacher, you know, you need to work from home because they are so committed to their craft, to their young people, that they do want to come in. So it's been quite difficult convincing some of those vulnerable teachers to say, look, you know, we don't take anything away from you. You have to work from home. And I think it is important to recognize the efforts over the last year during this pandemic that teachers have put forward, and not just teachers, support staff, people working in the kitchen, in the canteen, the cleaners, the whole school community to keep schools open. I think they've done an admirable job.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and like they've like teachers this year have been so resilient, so adaptable, and they've been so creative in the way that they can try and get through to these kids, because that has been the number one priority. I mean, it's remarkable to see like the way that the government have kind of played it out this year. And in my opinion, it should, like Gavin Williamson, Jesus Christ, he doesn't know anything about education, right? He came into power last year and then COVID happens and he goes missing for a year. I mean, education secretaries, they come in for 18 to 24 months. I think the average is like 19 months or something. It's a year and 7 months or something. And like, what changes and what are you going to implement within 2 years of being in power? Like, government are given 4 years, for God's sake, you know, like to try to change the country. I mean, how is an education secretary going to make a difference in 2 years? They're only going to be here, like pretend to do stuff, and then in 2 years' time they're going to move on and never look back, and then somebody else is going to come up with new ideas and then work there for 2 years and then move on. I mean, the education system is never going to fix itself like that. What needs to happen is education needs to stop being a political football. It needs to be run by educators. Like in Dubai, they have a Ministry of Education that is literally filled with education, teachers that have been in the profession, and they are the ones that kind of collaborate with teachers and school leaders and find out what's going on for them and then come up with policies. That needs to happen in the UK. It needs to be a completely separate entity from politicians, because people like Gavin Williamson, they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, he's never been in a school, you know?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of benefits to making sure the ministries are working with the unions. I mean, we've got some really, really good unions in England, and they have very clear vision about what schools should be. It's constantly having that working party relationship so that things are not being prescribed down, that actually things are being announced in partnership. It's always disheartening when an announcement is made and then the unions release a letter to say we don't support that announcement. It just shows you the level of disconnect between those working in education and maybe some of those who are leading the strategic education for the government.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at like what Greenwich, I mean, the Greenwich Council wanted to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And Gavin Williamson said, no, we're going to sue you. Like, you have to keep them open. I mean, there's a new strain like of COVID, and it's like rapidly growing. I mean, the hospital down the road from me is filled with COVID patients. But you're still asking these kids to come in when the local council, who know the area, are advising schools to shut down. I mean, is that not just mind blowing?
Yeah, I think for the families as well. I mean, for me, it's more about the families getting a message saying school's going to be closed, and then the next day getting a different message saying, no, we're not going to be closed. And, you know, however we make these decisions, we've got to make sure we sign them off properly so that actually one consistent message goes to families, because essentially they've got to plan for closure or opening of schools. But you're right, there is a lot of disconnect. And I think the COVID pandemic has actually exposed a lot of that disconnect. And I think going forward, one thing we have to take away from this pandemic, because one day it will be over, we will get back to some sort of new normality, but it's making sure that actually there's a bit more joined up processes between government, local authority and schools on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've gone through so much, right? And there is a clear understanding that we do need to evolve education. You know, I mean, education is a fascinating profession. I mean, teachers go above and beyond to make a difference to their kids, but it's about kind of now giving them the right resources, not just any resources that just kind of get spent anywhere, but like the right resources to make sure that they can do the best for their kids, because that's what it's all about. You know, it's about looking at the curriculum and how we can tailor it to our kids. Because there's no point somebody in inner city London learning the same things as somebody that's in a rural part of England that has complete different demographics and complete different employment backgrounds in terms of their families. You know, it's about how we're going to make them relatable to our kids. And does it make it a little bit more difficult to assess? Yes, it does, because data is going to be very difficult to manage, right? But why does it have to? Like, why do we need data? If we have good educators in the system and we trust our educators to go and do what they do best, and that's like provide our kids with an opportunity, then why do we need data? We need to give them trust and autonomy and let the schools collaborate in the area to make sure that we are providing an education to all of these kids in a positive way.
Well, I don't think it's. I think there's an argument for not limiting data. If you are going to use data, then include a lot more measures. For instance, 2 years after leaving school, how many of those kids have gained employment, not just stayed in training? You know, I think there's other matrices you can bring in so that you get a global picture. I had a friend who was head of a school in Felixstowe, and the results were not great, but the kids all went on to work in the docks. So essentially, regardless of what grades they got in secondary school, there was ready employment in the docks, because Felixstowe, as you know, has got a massive docks, which is going to become more prominent with Brexit. So, you know, how you judge a school, there should be different ways, and it shouldn't just be, you know, what's the progress measure of that school, what's the Ofsted rating of that school, because I think, you know, being able to walk into gainful employment should be a really, really good measure as well. You know, and even what courses the kids are going on to do at university, even if you group the courses, so you're clear about actually what courses are these young people going off to do at university, and even more importantly, how many drop off after year one of university? You know, if it's a wrong university course, then a lot of young people drop off after a year and then still owe that incredible debt they've accumulated in 1 year. So how do we dissuade them from actually, you know, taking that step and so being saddled with that debt for years to come?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, data, unfortunately, is just a way of measuring teachers more than is actually measuring teachers' progress in some respect, isn't it? I mean, it's a shame, because that goes again back to not trusting our teachers to do what they are qualified to do and putting trust in the profession. Because in countries around the world, I mean, the profession is so highly regarded. And in the UK, I mean, it's almost come second to the economy this year, hasn't it? You know, like, what, it should not be a battle. I mean, you're talking about the future of our economy. Like the future workforce are these kids. We should be investing in them and making sure that they're going to be able to have the right opportunities to make sure we can compete globally in the future, because again, they're our future workforce, you know. And
yeah, that was a real shock to me, actually, having been educated in Africa, coming to England, because in Africa, teachers are really held in the very highest esteem. You know, what they say goes. They are the law. And I think, I don't know, I haven't done much research on why that culture doesn't exist in England, because actually it was a very different relationship. And it wasn't because you were scared of your teachers in Africa. It was just the whole community held teachers in very, very high regard. Whereas in England, we are fighting for that regard. It feels like sometimes, you know, if you were to, you know, write a negative letter home on email home about a child, you would honestly the negativity you get back most of the times makes you think, well, maybe next time, you know, I won't bother. Whereas in different cultures, you're right. If a teacher says your child is not working hard enough, something's going to change about that, rather than, oh, what are you not doing as a teacher? Maybe it's your, you know. So I think it's very different here, and that's something I've never been able to unpick, because in Africa, it's very, very different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel for the education profession here in the UK. I mean, you guys have been absolute heroes this year. I mean, it genuinely breaks my heart in some ways, because, I mean, like, sometimes the rep the profession gets for the level of work you do. But I am sure that there are so many parents that are so appreciative for the work that you guys have done for your children. And
we get quite a lot of compliments on, you know, the school does get commended. So families are recognizing the effort the schools have done just in keeping schools open. You know, throughout the whole pandemic, my school was open. Throughout Easter holidays, we were open. So we teachers and school staff have really stepped up and really, played a community role, really.
Yeah, absolutely, and we can't thank you enough for that, and it's a shame that the public, I mean, like the media and politicians portray the profession in a certain way, but I do genuinely feel it's time for unions, the Chartered College of Teaching, to kind of like get together and say, look, enough's enough, no more mixed opinions, we need to stand firm, and this is what we need to do to make sure that education moves forward, because it does need to move forward. And but it is, I think there is a level of evolving that is going on in education, and I'm looking forward to see where the next 5 to 10 years go in education. But I think it's important we start having these conversations now if we're going to make this a reality,
very important. It's always good to talk about what's going on in school. So we sort of, you remove the mystique. I think one thing that's really important for me as a Black African head teacher is to work hard on removing that mystique, because if I can keep that door open, I know there's a lot of capable Black African, Caribbeans, Asian teachers who will aspire to be head teachers. And I think, again, the more we get different voices, different experiences rising to the top, the easier it will be to actually, for young people to see those role models in terms of actually this job is doable, and it's one that actually you gain a lot of satisfaction from getting it right and serving young people. And that's the only reason I've come into the profession, and hopefully I've done that in the 20 years I've been in education.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've obviously watched you on social media, and I've been following you for a little while. So I know the amazing things you're doing, and I see all the compliments you're getting and the photos, the random photos that you put up there of the different things you're doing. And sometimes the Saturday classes to make sure that you can help the kids to come back, like catch up. And I mean, you obviously, I know you go above and beyond with your school. And obviously I've seen the journey you've kind of been on, especially in the last few months, kind of your journey at Woodcote. And yeah, I mean, you're doing amazing stuff, Paul. I mean, I just keep it up, and hopefully we won't lose you out of the profession too soon. But yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on. We'll leave it there because I know I've taken up a lot of your time. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your views, mate. My pleasure. Thank you very much, and always happy to talk about education. Yeah, fantastic. And you're a great role model. So yeah, I hope people listen, and I know you've got a lot of respect on social media. So yeah, look, thank you for coming on and sharing your views. Fantastic. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a happy new year. You too.